All right, g'day. On my show this week at Meet Adelaide, I have a very important guest. It's Beyonce of the legal profession in many ways. So, David Edwardson is a Queen's Counsel and works here in Adelaide as a barrister. You're one of the top criminal lawyers in South Australia and I'd suggest the Northern Territory. And for me, as a junior solicitor, David is someone that I absolutely look up to. He has an incredibly smart mind and an incredibly interesting way of looking at life. I remember calling you up on the phone on a matter that we were working on. And you said, well, that sounds like a good job, Mr. Davis. And I was incredibly relieved. So I'm not sure if you realize the panic that perhaps sometimes you induce in junior solicitors, but I suggest all for the good reasons, which is why I'm so excited that you could agree to come onto my show today and share a little bit of a story about you.
More than happy to be here.
So, David, can you tell me about where you started in life? Did you grow up in Adelaide? Are you from Adelaide originally?
No, I was actually born in England, in Manchester. We lived in Macclesfield until I was about 7 or 8 or thereabouts. And then my family migrated to Australia, and I've been here in Adelaide since then.
Yeah, right. So how old when you...
About 8.
About 8?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay. And so what was it like moving from England to...
Well, what I can
And
remember
why South
of it...
Australia?
Well, my father is a dentist, or was then. And basically the family, or mum and dad, decided that they'd have a much better life in Adelaide, and Adelaide was chosen. So the rest is history.
Yeah, right. And, okay, fantastic. And where'd you start off your schooling?
I went to Saints Boys throughout. So I started in grade 4, and then from Saints I went to Adelaide University.
Yep.
And then from Adelaide University I went to a firm then called Piper, Bakewell and Piper for about 2.5 years, 3 years.
Yeah.
Then I went into partnership with Eugene McGee for a year, and then finally went to the bar in 1988, and I've been there since.
Yeah, right. And so, so you went through Adelaide University, and did you study a straight law degree?
I started off doing law economics.
Yep.
Hated economics. Went back to law and straight law, and that's all I've done.
Yeah, I did law arts, but I just did, because I'm terrible at maths, so I did law arts and I did all the easy subjects in economics, which were fun, and I did philosophy as the other way to make my arts degree a lot easier. So,
well, anyway, economics wasn't my thing.
Yeah, right. Not good at maths?
I'm okay at maths, but crime was always really my interest, and so
right.
Economics didn't really join with that.
When did you start to have that?
Even at university, I did all criminal subjects, penology, criminology, criminal evidence, all of those subjects were my favourite.
Yeah, right. And what do you think drew you to criminal law?
I don't know, to be honest. I've just always had an interest in it.
Yep.
I think criminal work is a lot of theatre, and there is theatre in the courtroom.
Right.
And jury trials, or trials generally, in crime, that's when you get into court, and that's when you do it. I mean, the civil lawyers rarely actually go to court.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I go down for a directions hearing every now and again, but they always settle.
Exactly.
So it's not that interesting.
Crime doesn't settle, or at least rarely.
Sure, right. I guess, yeah, because sure. Why do you think it doesn't settle? Because the prosecution is ready to run the case and they're committed once they...
Well, it's either going to end up being a contest, a trial, or it's going to be what we call a plea, occasionally a discontinuance or what we call a nolli prosequi, but that's rare. So generally speaking, you either plead early and get whatever discount you can get, or alternatively, it's a full-on fight.
Yeah, right. So you know from the very beginning.
You do.
Well, yes, in like civil litigation or the civil world, it's generally negotiation the whole way through, and the matter gets adjourned off, and no one ever wants to go to an actual hearing on the matter.
Well, in crime, you've got really no choice.
Yeah, right. And so you studied that at Adelaide University. Were you interested in any other areas, or was it straight for like what? Did you always want to go into crime?
No, always crime. When I started at Piper, Bakewell and Piper, they used to act for the RAA, and it started off in its most basic form doing basically road traffic work. So, and that then became drink driving work, and I did a lot of that for a number of years.
Yeah.
And then slowly but surely the type of criminal work or prosecution work grew until what I do now, which is obviously very different again.
And so you're working internally within a firm. So let's start with what is a Queen's Counsel, because that's quite a strange term. What does that mean, QC?
Well, Queen's Counsel is basically a commission. The other way of being referred to is senior counsel, but without the commission, but it's the same thing.
Yeah.
And basically, the court determines whether you are fit to be senior counsel or Queen's Counsel. So it's obviously a very important part of your professional life. and it's really a recognition of seniority, professionalism and expertise.
I don't think there are many tax lawyers who get to be QCs.
Oh, there are a few around the place,
Yeah.
but they're usually interstate.
Yeah, that's right. So you're at the bar now. What does that mean? So to become a barrister versus a solicitor, what's the difference between the two?
Well, I've always practiced, since 1988 at Bar Chambers in Carrington Street. And basically, when you're a barrister, you only accept instructions from a solicitor. So to use the example, a doctor, GP gives you a referral to go to a specialist. It's very much like that. So I work hand in glove with a solicitor. The solicitor has the client. The solicitor puts the brief together, and basically I argue the case.
Yeah, okay. And you've had some pretty high-profile ones, high-profile cases, I suppose. But did you always think that you would go to the bar from early on, from when you started your law degree? Is that
very, very early? I always wanted to go to the bar. My then mentors were Michael David, who was then a Queen's Counsel, and now a retired Supreme Court judge, and also Kevin Duggan, again Queen's Counsel and retired judge. They were sort of senior members of the legal profession then at the bar, and they were looking for a criminal junior, and so I was in the right place at the right time.
Right, okay.
And so I went to Bar Chambers, and that's it.
Right, you went straight in. Yeah,
I did.
Because there's often a pressure, I suppose, is to not go to the bar too early for. So I think in New South Wales and in Melbourne, solicitors will either go and become solicitors, or they'll become barristers straight away. Whereas in South Australia, that's not necessarily the case. Did you feel like a pressure to try and get work when you went to the bar? Did you have those contacts?
I did, because I was
hungry at the bar.
I was hungry. I wasn't hungry. I didn't go without work. In fact, I've never gone without work, fortunately. And I was very, very young. But the status of Bar Chambers of itself generated work. I mean, it's always had an exceptional background.
That's right. Okay. And so where did that work come from? Other barristers within your chambers?
Well, I had existing files when I was in partnership with Eugene McGee.
Yeah.
So I sort of had a ready-made practice, as it were, when I
How
first
old were
went
you
there.
when you were in partnership?
About 28, I think.
28.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So yeah, because I'm 32 and I've just gone out by myself, and that seems young from the scheme of things. But I get the impression that in times, in 20, 30 years ago, that was more common to go out by yourself earlier. Whereas now you seem to stay within the legal profession a lot longer before you perhaps start your own firm or go to the bar.
Well, the bar's certainly grown a lot since I've started.
Okay.
I mean, there are a lot of chambers now, and there are a lot more people who choose to practice as a barrister as opposed to a solicitor, and particularly in crime.
Well, when you were growing up, was that the first thing when they said, "What do you want to be when you grow up?"
No, I want to be a dentist.
You want to be a dentist?
I missed out by 3 marks, and
Yeah,
somebody
right.
said to me, "You're an argumentative fellow. Why don't you do law?" So I did.
Right. So what's an example of, were you argumentative growing up? Do you have any?
Apparently.
Did you fight with your teachers, or you didn't think so? You thought you were probably very reasonable.
No, I was always in strife at school, actually. But
Oh, were you?
not in any serious way, but I had the
I managed to talk my way out of the strife I got into.
of that nature.
Yeah. I figured out. I used to go to French school, and I didn't understand what they were talking about. Even in year 9, I'd done like 9 years of it, and so my teacher would always give me detention on a Tuesday morning. And I couldn't figure out, he'd always ask me, "Did you do your homework on a Tuesday morning?" I was like, "I don't know." No, I didn't. And so I get detention. And then I figured out that it was always the morning tea of the teacher's morning tea on Tuesdays. And so then on Wednesdays and Thursdays and Fridays for an entire week, I told him I hadn't done my homework in front of the entire class. So he had to give me detention every single day. And then basically told him, "I'm going to hold you to ransom with detentions unless you let me go." So we came to an arrangement where I'd get detentions every couple of days, but I'd leave after a couple of minutes and run out of it.
Well, we had a similar sort of thing. There was a very, very fabulous teacher called Ray Stanley, and he used to. In fact, there are tunnels underneath the one of the main buildings around the main oval at Saints, where we used to hide and smoke. And he'd catch us from time to time and then impose a Saturday detention. But instead of making us work, as in doing manual tasks and things of that nature, he would basically give us coaching for physics and chem. So that was a plus.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Did you do physics and chemistry at school as well?
I did all sciences.
Yeah, right. Same as me. Yeah. I used to love physics and chemistry. That was my favourite subjects. Something about the natural world that always intrigued me, I suppose.
Well, sciences, I think, it was really because it was focused on dentistry, and that was the
So
thing.
when did the shift happen? Was your parents who suggested you go into law?
No, it was a great mate of mine's, a friend of his actually, who I got to know quite well.
Okay, and he led you astray?
He did. He led me astray, but I'm very pleased that he did make that, influence me in that way.
For sure. And what did your parents think about that?
Oh, Mum and Dad were very pleased, and they've always been pleased about my choice in the profession. In fact, Dad thinks it's probably the better choice of the two.
Yeah. My dad was always very disappointed that I became a lawyer. He hated lawyers. So when I told him I was going to become a lawyer, he didn't tell anyone. And he kept telling everyone that I was in the Air Force. So we kind of a separate difference there, but he was a shearer. So how was your schooling like? How did you...
Oh, I loved school. I had a great time. I really enjoyed it.
Did you row or do any...
No, tennis and squash were the sports that I was into. But
yeah.
No, it was... Saints was just a really good school. I really, really enjoyed it. My brother hated it. And Dad used to basically say, to use his expression, if you don't pull up your socks, you'll come out of school and I'll put you in somewhere else. But John begged them to take him out, but they didn't.
Yep.
And I stayed on and enjoyed it, even though I was in trouble from time to time.
Yeah, for sure. Did you do well at school? Did you?
Yeah, well, I got into law and did all right.
Yeah, okay, fantastic. And went straight into Adelaide University. How'd you find your uni days? Did you?
I had an absolute ball.
Yeah.
Adelaide Uni back then, I think, is very different from uni days, what seems to be these days, because everyone does their things online and they don't seem to have that social focus that we used to have.
Yep.
At university was just such fun.
For me, when I was studying, I barely went in. And so I got a full-time job rather than actually go to university or my tutes or whatever. So how many hours a week would you actually spend at university?
Not a lot. Well, when I say we of course, pub crawls and movies and all that sort of thing. But we only had, laws, it wasn't very intensive in terms of hours, of actual contact hours. But nonetheless, we would be there every day.
Yeah, okay. So when you went to the bar, what was that like as a... I guess you were in partnership straight away, so...
No. When you're at the bar, you practice independently of each other. You just share the overheads. So you can't be in partnership if you're a barrister. But before that, when I was in partnership, that was only for just less than a year. Right. But at least it set me up, as it were, for when I started. Yeah.
So from the time when you left university to when you, so you immediately started practicing after.
I went from university to Piper, Bakewell and Piper, and I think I was there for about 3 years.
3 years, and then you were in partnership at that point.
And no, then I went into partnership with Eugene McGee.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Waiting really for a vacancy at Bar Chambers.
Right.
And that happened fairly quickly.
Yeah. Okay. And how did you build your client base? Because you had work and you had files that you'd brought over from the previous firm, but then from there, and you also had the support of the Bar Chambers, but it was just through word of mouth and people seeing that.
Yes, and also I had a sort of an obsession with drink driving and, to put it bluntly, dismantling the legislation back then. Diane Laidlaw used to call me the friend of the drink driver.
Right.
In Parliament. She'd say the friend of the drink driver has struck again.
So
we're forced to move yet another amendment to the Road Traffic Act.
Right, so that would be great advertising, I can imagine.
It was. But later in life, particularly when I applied to become a Queen's Counsel, politicians were far less flattering. Mike Rann referred to me as an enemy of the state.
Really?
Amongst other things, and he's the one that he actually blocked it. And
he blocked your QC
Yep,
shit?
he wouldn't allow it to happen.
Wow.
And the court intervened in the end and said if he doesn't get it, nobody does. And eventually he capitulated, and the rest is history.
Wow. So why did he block it? Because he saw that you were successful in court.
I think in those days I was doing some very controversial cases. The case of Paul Niemer was one example amongst others, and basically they were being used as part of the Rand government's tough on crime mantra.
Right.
Lock them up, rack 'em, pack 'em and stack 'em, and all those lines that they used to use. And so I was a figurehead that they could target, and that's what happened.
Oh, as a reason for their lack of success.
Well, yes, but fortunately it backfired, because all it did was just, if you like, promote me.
Absolutely.
Those who are wrongly accused loved it.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And probably, what's your view on that dichotomy? Your job is to defend people, and you have prosecutions, and that's a fair battle. And you start with they have the entire police force. But from an ethical point of view, how do you see that relationship?
Well, it's an adversarial system. My job's not to work out whether they're guilty or not. a jury or a judge makes that decision. My job's to make sure that they get a fair trial, protect their interests insofar as I'm able, and put their case to the best of my ability. The prosecution, on the other hand, are there to prosecute, and that's what they're to do. They're to actually attempt to prove beyond reasonable doubt the crime that they're charged with.
So this is an obvious question. I'm sure you've been asked so many times.
How can you act for somebody when you know they're guilty?
Sure, and that's and I understand that question, but I think someone who doesn't have that understanding of the legal, in my view, the whole thing collapses, right?
Well, of course it does, and we're very fortunate in Australia to have the system that we do have. It's not perfect, but it's pretty good.
What do you think about the French system in terms of the judge-led
inquisitorial type of scenario?
Spanish Inquisition. The Spanish started, or
yes
who was
and
that?
no. To be honest, I've never been exposed to it. I'm a great believer in our court system and the way it works here. I think in South Australia we've got an advantage of an accused person being entitled as of right to have trial by judge alone, and that's a very, very important thing, particularly where there's very bad publicity on the internet and things of that nature that might be prejudicial to the fair trial of an accused person.
Do you think that leads in? Obviously, you believe that leads to better outcomes for the accused in that circumstance?
Well, it's like anything. It's important that the accused has a fair trial, and if they're not going to get a fair trial because of controversial or bad publicity, then you have to think long and hard about whether you do, in fact, ask for trial by judge alone rather than a jury. And the other advantage of that is that a judge has to give reasons.
Okay.
So they have to actually set out how and why they've arrived at whatever decision they make, whereas, of course, juries don't.
Right. So what's the thought processing in going and making that particular decision? Because that would be that's massive.
Well, it can be. I mean, it depends. You see, you might have a very technical legal case, which is complex, and you might say to yourself or advise the client, look, I think you should have trial by judge alone in these circumstances. Or it might be, for example, that they've got an extensive criminal history which has been widely publicised, and you might in those circumstances say to the accused, look, I think you should have trial by judge alone because the jury is going to be very prejudiced by accessing that sort of information.
Right. And when you're picking a jury, what kind of considerations go into that?
Well, it can be a whole variety of things. You might want an older jury, more experienced jury, or a younger jury, depending upon the type of crime. A balance mix, if you can. I mean, they're all quite important things. In South Australia, we're only entitled to 3 challenges without showing cause. That's right. Whereas when I recently did the Zach Rolfe case in Darwin, I think they have 12.
12 challenges. Yes, wow, you can get rid of the whole thing. Is that each the prosecution and the defense?
Yes.
Because I've been watching. So my experience with criminal lawyers, of course, like the Lincoln lawyer or something, and that's all very.
We don't cross-examine jurors like they do in America.
Right. Okay.
But what we do have is access to their name, their occupation, and address. That's generally speaking all the information you have, and also what you physically observe.
So it's really just the way that you observe them. Yeah. And I guess there's a lot of information on the internet as well.
Well, the internet won't tell you who they are or what they do, but their occupation might speak to, for example, to give you a very simple example, let's say you've got an armed robbery.
Yeah.
You wouldn't want a bank teller.
Sure.
On the jury.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, you might want
a firefighter for arson or something.
Exactly, same sort of thing. Although often
sure.
firefighters are accused of arson.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. And so, what's it like? What's the difference between making your submissions to a jury versus making it to a judge?
Well, jury, you're speaking to ordinary people, and so you've got to talk in plain language. But there is it's fun talking to a jury. It's fun telling a story to 12 people. It's fun taking them on that ride or that journey as the case unfolds. And so that, from an advocate's point of view, that's the most pleasurable part about doing criminal work, I think.
Yeah, and you talked about theatre of the court before. What does that look like? Do you have any examples of?
Oh, there's been plenty of examples, I think, over the years. But I mean, there was a very simple one. I mean, I used to have a judge. There used to be a judge called Tony Bishop, and I've been accused of talking too quickly many times by court reporters who have to take it down. Yeah. And he used to put his pen up in the air when I was talking too quickly to slow me down. But that's a simple example. But really what it's all about is making sure that you can explain to the jury how and why you say that they should go in a particular direction. And that's a skill that comes with, experience.
Lawyers aren't allowed to be on jury duty.
No.
But what do you think it's like for when you're in a murder trial, say even in Rolf case? That was a national matter that had huge coverage.
It did.
And a huge amount of interest from various large interest groups like Black Lives Matter and things like that at the time. That was a jury trial?
It was a jury trial. It was in the Northern Territory. It certainly did have massive national and overseas interest. The media coverage was probably unlike anything I've ever experienced in my lifetime. And although Black Lives Matter behind the scenes became an issue, the case was never fought on the basis of race. In fact, race was never mentioned in the course of it. He happened to be an Indigenous victim or a person that was shot. But having said that, it really was like any other murder in the sense that the jury had to decide whether the prosecution had negated the defences that were available to Zachary Rolfe. In particular, in his case, self-defence was the primary argument.
Does it change things when you have a national attention on the case and the way that it's run? And
for me now, not so much. Okay. Certainly, when I was younger, it's just another pressure, added pressure. I mean, I once had a trial in Perth, and to my knowledge, it's the only time a murder trial's been filmed from go to woe. And in fact, I can tell you one funny story about that. It was a guy called Evans who was charged with murder, and the Chief Justice in Western Australia decided that he wanted to have it filmed, along with there were other cases around the country being filmed, but not murder. Anyway, I wasn't enamoured with this idea at all, and wouldn't support it, but I was overridden, and basically he said, get on with it. So we did. The day before the jury were impanelled, we had pre-trial issues before Justice McKechnie, as he then was. And I walked out of court with my junior and instructing solicitor, and I said, those cameras, they're amazing. I said, they're not going to bother me at all. I said, I couldn't see any of them. I don't know where they hid them. And they started laughing, telling me that the cameras weren't arriving till tomorrow morning. Oh. And so the following morning, the full production arrived.
Right.
The one thing I wouldn't do or didn't do in that case was to give a running commentary, which is what they wanted. As the case unfolded, I said, I'm happy to be interviewed after the verdict. And you can, if you like, put it as though it's happening during the course of the trial. But short of my appearance in court, I wasn't going to get sidetracked by giving running commentary as the case ran.
Because I think particularly where they do have national coverage, there's also a lot of implications for the future of the accused and also their family as well, who's very much involved in it. So I can imagine there'd be quite a significant pressure.
Absolutely.
To make comments and to...
Absolutely.
And in the public eyes, at least, try and, grab their attention.
Of course. I mean, the other thing, of course, is you're always conscious of the fact that cameras are rolling. I just think it's a distraction you don't need. By that, I mean having them filmed as they unfold.
Yeah. I mean, recently we've had the Johnny Depp case over in America.
What a fiasco that was.
Yeah. And I think that would have been a lot of people's... For many people, that would be their only really experience with the legal system, particularly if they were younger.
There's nothing real about that trial, I don't think.
Yeah. So what's the comparison? What if you were to say to someone, what's the difference, between Johnny Depp and the ones that you run?
Well, I thought what limited amount I saw on either YouTube or the TV or whatever it was, the question really was who was doing the acting. And because there was a lot of acting, as far as I could tell, that was going on in that courtroom, and by everybody. Yeah. The lawyers were playing up. The two participants in the litigation, they were plainly acting in part.
Yeah.
And so it was really like a movie set. And I think that's unfortunate.
And then changed. I mean, that's what people's perceptions are then of the...
Of course.
Yeah. Of reality or what it is to be in a criminal trial. What's it like being the accused? I mean, you'd have...
Well, I've never been the accused, so I hope I never am.
No.
But look, it's very daunting. It's daunting, and again, it depends from person to person.
Yeah.
But anybody who's charged with a crime is under immense pressure, and their fate is determined by a judge or jury, particularly if it's a more serious charge, and that's a very difficult thing.
How do they? I mean, I guess they would have a range of reactions, but I suppose there are some people who have had convictions before who might be more organised than others.
Oh, inevitably. There are some who are seasoned campaigners, if I can put it that way. And so they're quite robust about the system and how to deal with it and so on. But, you know, there are a lot of people who get exposed to a criminal offence who've never been in trouble with the law before. I mean, the most difficult trials, I think, from my perspective, are almost certainly what we call causing death by dangerous driving, where somebody has an accident, a car accident. And I'm not talking about the extreme cases of massive speed, drugs, alcohol, things of that nature. I'm talking about somebody who has an accident, tragically somebody dies, and the consequences of being convicted are huge. These days, almost certainly jail. And that person, almost without question, they'll never do it again. They're not a seasoned criminal. They have no criminal record. And incarceration, for me personally, I just don't think it's the answer at all.
Right. What do you think would be, because in most cases they did something silly or got distracted or driving without due care, and they've made an error.
It depends on case to case basis. But you know, I don't know. I'm a great believer in home detention jail.
Yeah.
Because jail's really there for the protection of the community, and if they're a danger to the community, then of course they belong in jail. That's what jails are for. They're there also to punish, of course. But if somebody's not a danger to the community, even if they have breached the law, then I think if they're going to be incarcerated, incarceration at home is a much more sensible solution, not the least of which is the cost. Yes. I mean, the cost of a prisoner is, I don't know, over $100,000 a year per person.
Yeah, it's quite funny from a tax point of view. You don't pay your taxes so that you can live, and so they put you in prison and they take taxpayers' dollars and pay you to live.
That's the way it is, unfortunately.
It's quite funny. So in terms of prison, and I mean, there's probably a perception in some of our community that don't feel that penalties are serious enough or they're not strict enough, and I think that's always something that political parties will roll out at every election, saying that we're going to get tough on crime.
Oh, look, politicians come and go. Politicians are always beating the drum saying, let's get tough on crime and trying to increase penalties and the like. But I'll tell you something. We used to do a program every year through the Law Society where basically we'd do a mock trial and a mock sentencing submission. And basically the community would come into the courts and then they would watch the mock plea or the mock trial unfold, and then they'd be asked by a judge what they thought the appropriate range of sentence should be. And they would also hear the prosecution first, and they'd record what that might be first, and then the defence afterwards, and that would obviously significantly change, or at least you'd hope so. And almost without question, the penalty that they would impose was much, much less than what in reality happens in courts.
Really?
Yeah.
How interesting. I guess when you're faced with the actual facts of the matter and the person and their history, things change a lot.
And there's nothing like actually being in the courtroom itself. It's very different from just getting a grab on a newspaper, from a newspaper or TV channel.
Which is meant to shock you.
Of course. Of course.
And when people have had that media attention, I mean, do you know if that changes? Do you know people remember it, or do they largely, if they're, say, acquitted, for example, say with Rolf, and don't necessarily need to use that as an example, but generally, if someone has become the subject of a national matter, what's their life look like after that?
Well, again, it varies from person to person. Zachary Rolf was an exceptional young man, in my view. I personally take the view that he should never have been charged. But he was, and we fought it, and the jury, thankfully, came back with a unanimous not guilty of all charges, and in my view, rightly so. But there are other examples, and I'll give you one where I think the publicity and the intensity of it has been extraordinary. Was a guy called Lloyd, who I represented in Western Australia. He was one of the most senior prosecutors in Perth. He was charged with the murder of his wife, who was then the registrar in the Supreme Court. And there is no doubt in my view that he was wrongly accused. There is no doubt in my view that the verdict of not guilty was right and that he did not kill his wife. We chose trial by judge alone in that case. We had to fight for it in Western Australia. And the trial was actually heard by Justice Martin, who's a former Supreme Court Justice from South Australia and became the Chief Justice in the Territory before retiring, and then he did, as an acting Justice, the case of Rainey. Now, that was an extraordinary high-profile case where people would queue up every day to come to court and watch, and it was really, really difficult. And I think the publicity and the intensity of the publicity in his case, because of the public perception of who he is and the view that he was guilty, at least in the lead up to the trial, I think has had a profound effect on him.
I guess, yeah. And there's no, because say if you are wrongly accused and that becomes apparent potentially throughout the trial, and I've had a couple of matters where that, in a criminal case where that's become apparent, is there any, and you have to pay significantly for your legal team to defend you, is there an ability to seek costs?
Well, no, you can't seek costs unless you can show that it's a malicious prosecution. And again, it depends in which state, because some states do have a basis upon which you can apply for costs. But when you say wrongly accused, I think the best example I can give you is a case I did last year in Western Australia, a young man by the name of Scott Ostick. Scott Ostick, in 2009, was convicted of the brutal stabbing and murder of a woman called Stacey Thorne, whom he was in a relationship with. The motive for the killing on the Crown case was that she was pregnant to him. He wanted her to terminate the pregnancy. She wouldn't, and so he killed her. The evidence against him was, amongst other things, a packet of cigarettes with her blood on it outside of his house, a knife, which they said was the murder weapon, with her blood on it, and various other bits of evidence. I won't go into the detail of it now. But in short, he got convicted, he served 13 years of a life sentence with an on-parole period of 24 years. Then a petition of mercy was launched with the Attorney-General in Western Australia, John Quigley, which carried favour with him, and so it was referred back to the Supreme Court. On appeal, they overturned the conviction and ordered a retrial. And they did it on the basis that there was reliable, cogent and plausible evidence of planting by police.
Right.
The defence case was that every single piece of evidence that condemned him was planted by police. And that was what went to the jury, and they returned a unanimous not guilty verdict. And needless to say, that was the subject of a great deal of publicity. And since then, on the ABC, they did a program, a two-episode program on it, and it's still very controversial. But Scott Ostick is now seeking compensation. He, like Mallard before him in Western Australia, Mallard got paid some millions, and I expect Scott Ostick eventually will be compensated for having served 13 years on the basis of that evidence.
Yeah. I mean, as a normal citizen, you'd want to have faith in your police to administer the system.
I think South Australian police, generally speaking, are excellent.
Yeah.
I can't say the same thing about West Australian police.
All right. What's your experience, say, New South Wales or Victoria? Because
I've appeared everywhere. So Victoria's had its highs and lows. In fact, one of my juniors many years ago was Nicola Gobbo, Lawyer X, which was terrifying at the time. I didn't like her then. I don't like her now. And the rest is history. I mean, that the extent of the way in which she, together with the Victorian police, just undermined the whole notion of the independence of a barrister. Their conduct was appalling, and the way in which she behaved is unlike anything I've ever seen in my life. And that's had a massive effect on people's belief in the criminal justice system in Victoria, at least.
And so, can you touch on that? What kind of rights, if you're a client, when you speak to a barrister, do you expect from them in terms of professional legal privilege?
Well, it's all covered by what we call legal professional privilege, and the only person that can waive that right is, of course, the accused person or the client. And what was happening, of course, in the context of Nicola Gobbo was that she was recording and breaching or passing on the information that was conveyed by clients to the police so that they could then build their case against the accused. Right. So she was working for them, even though she was meant to be acting for and on behalf of that person.
Right. And from, I think for an everyday citizen, that would be quite conflicting because she's passing on evidence that is probably meritorious and useful for the police to get the conviction. But on the same, they're confiding in her and relying on her. What do you say to that?
It's the most significant abuse of public position, abuse of power. I can't begin to tell you how serious it is. In fact, because it was so serious and because people were concerned about whether that practice had ever developed in South Australia, I, as chair of the Crim Law Committee of the Bar Association, wrote an open letter to the Commissioner of Police here, in effect asking whether it had ever occurred in any circumstance in South Australia, and unequivocally Grant Stevens made it clear that it had never happened in South Australia, it will never happen in South Australia, and so people can be confident that that is confined to that one individual and a practice that developed in Victoria and Victoria alone.
Sure. Great. And so I suppose coming back to those practices in South Australia, what do you think from a judicial system we could be doing better as a state? What would you change if you could?
Well, a number of things. I was involved in meeting with the former Premier, Jay Weatherall, about increasing judicial discretion for sentencing, for example, home detention release. And he responded to that and passed legislation, which has been unfortunately whittled away in part by the subsequent government and governments. I think there should be much more flexibility by judges to fashion a sentence that's appropriate, at the same time protecting the community, of course. So I would allow for, and also I'd allow for what I call partially suspended sentences, which means you might serve some time, but then you're released on suspension. At the moment, you can only do that if the sentence of imprisonment is less than 1 year. It should be at large, like it is in the Commonwealth. So that's one thing. They've done a pretty good job, I must say, of redoing the Samuel Way building, and although it's a sort of eventually they're going to have to bite the bullet and build new courts. But as it happens, the way they've done it has been quite effective. So I think that's been pretty important.
Okay. So I read a book, I suppose. It's about judicial discretion. And there was a study in America where they gave 50 judges all the same facts, and they said, give a sentence. And the range of the outcomes of that was significant. It was from 1 year to 10 years in prison. So that would probably, from a community point of view, infer that there is no consistency or not a combined approach to it. What would you say in terms of giving more discretion to judicial officers?
Well, judges are governed by a range, and that range is usually identified by the Court of Appeal. So if a judge oversteps the mark and passes a sentence which is obviously manifestly inadequate, then the Crown or the DPP will appeal. It'll go back before the Court of Appeal, and they will interfere. And that's why basically we've got an appeal system. The appeal system is to keep everything in check. Absolutely. But I'm surprised, I must say, that you say that there was such a wide range, because that's certainly not my experience. Okay. There will be, of course, a range, and some judges are harsher than others. But generally speaking, that range is pretty clear. You can have a fairly good idea of what the likely range is, but of course you've got to factor in personal circumstances of the individual, and they are wide and varied.
And does the penalty increase? So if you've committed a crime before, does the penalty increase on any subsequent breach?
Well, you don't get punished twice, so you can't be punished for the fact that
if you recommit.
Yeah, but what it will do, it'll inform the court about prospects of rehabilitation, likelihood of reoffending, things of that nature. So that's why it's important. You're not going to get. A first offender is obviously much more likely to carry favour with a judge in getting, say, for example, a suspended sentence rather than an immediate custodial.
And when a lot of political, the Attorney General come out and say, we're going to increase the maximum sentence for this from 1 year to 2 years.
They all do.
Yeah. Do you actually see any impact? Because I would always say, well, it's always a maximum. And generally they're not granting the maximum in the first place of a year. It might be, 6 months good behaviour bond.
9 times out of 10, it's just it's politicians chest beating.
Yeah. Honestly. Is the outcome the same?
No.
Is there an average increase?
If they legislate specifically, that can make a difference, because obviously the judges are bound by the law, bound by the legislature. Yeah. So, but what I'm saying is that often the so-called tough on crime is just chest beating. It's all political mind playing, and you can always identify one case that might be an extreme example,
right? But
it doesn't represent the norm.
Okay. Yeah. Right. Okay. So, in terms of, say, minimum sentences, hard no.
Well, I don't agree with, it's a bit like 3 strikes, you're out, that sort of thing, which they did, I think, in the Territory for a while, which has been changed since, thankfully. Fortunately, we've never had that here. I don't think minimums are a good thing at all. I think every case turns on its own facts. Okay. And so that's what a judge is there for, to actually look at the global total position in fashioning an appropriate sentence, specific.
Yeah, what actions do you think the government could take to reduce crime?
Well, I don't know. There's lots of
Can I put a theory to you,
Sure.
for example? So it's been put to me, and I learned this through economics. Economics is always a great place to create new law. That if you legalize, say, all drugs, and the government controlled its distribution, and then taxed it, that would then reduce the amount of crime from, say, organized crime to then supply it.
I don't think there's any doubt that prohibition doesn't work. I don't think there's any doubt that we're losing the war. When I say we, the community is losing the war insofar as drug offending is concerned and drug distribution is concerned. And the idea that you've just put forward, which has been bounced around for as long as I've been in practice, unfortunately would almost certainly be politically suicidal. I just don't think any government in Australia would put forward that sort of approach.
Yeah. Even though potentially you think that idea might have merit.
Oh, I don't think there's much doubt. I think if it was properly controlled and you take away the massive profits that some people generate if they go down that path, then of course you're going to significantly reduce crime.
Yeah. I think the people's fear would then be that you're consenting or encouraging people to take by decriminalizing it. Say it's not a moral wrong to then, say, take drugs, for example.
Well, I don't think it would. Obviously it's going to have to be. It would have to be very carefully constrained.
Yeah.
And I don't think legalisation per se is just a green light for everyone to start taking drugs.
Yeah.
But having said
like
that,
smoking's legal and I don't smoke.
No. I mean, if you actually look at the number of offences that are committed as a consequence of alcohol, you probably find that there are more people who commit crimes.
You would definitely lose an election if
Exactly.
if you got rid of alcohol.
Exactly. If you prohibited alcohol.
Yeah, sure. So I'm a junior solicitor. I've been practicing for about 7 years. I guess it doesn't really make me junior anymore. But what advice would you give to someone starting out in law, just come out of university? What advice would you give to them?
Well, I think it's a wonderful profession. I think there are two things. One, your mentors, particularly early in practice, are really important. So try and make sure that you've got the appropriate mentor who can help you, because your first 3 years of particular practice are when you really do need that help and guidance. If you go down the path that I have, which is defence criminal work, I think the most important thing is to be absolutely at arm's length from your clients. Okay. In other words, no socialising. Don't get carried away with thinking that they're people that you want to be seen with, that sort of thing. Always maintain your professional distance. That way you can do your job properly.
That's very different from my area. So, because as a tax lawyer, I become very friendly with my accountants, and we develop, long-term relationships. So,
yeah, but that's a proper professional relationship, and of course you would. I'm talking about obviously criminal.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you'll see there are certain practitioners who seem to think it's a good idea to be seen drinking and partying with people who are involved in criminal activities, and I just think it's a very, very short end for their professional life.
Yeah. Where do you see the legal profession going in future? Do you think that it'll change? Do you think that we'll have, like, say, in South Australia, we're based on common law rather than, say, codification? Do you think that there'll be, I guess, where do you see the legal profession progressing over?
I'm not sure, actually. I think it's only a matter of time before we'll probably end up with the Uniform Evidence Act. I mean, most states around the country operate that way. I think the previous government was looking at it. I don't know whether the current government is. Whether we move from common law to a code, I don't know. It will depend on the government of the day.
What do you think would be better, common law or code?
I like the common law. I'm used to it. I mean, I'm obviously used to codes as well because I practice right around the country. Sure. But I do like the common law.
Okay. And the flexibility, I suppose.
The flexibility, it's made by lawyers or by judges rather than politicians, and I think that's often a good thing.
So coming to Adelaide as a city, you work at Bar Chambers. What street's that on?
Bar Chambers, Carrington Street.
On Carrington Street.
Just next to the Police Communications Centre.
Yeah, and it's not too far away from the pool cue, the 8-ball rink. I think it's just around the corner as well.
True. I've never been there, but
yeah, I walk past it every time. What do you love about Adelaide? Why did you stay in Adelaide and not move somewhere bigger like Sydney or Melbourne, where perhaps the clients are bigger and there's more organised crime? Perhaps
I can practice from Adelaide and still appear in every state and territory in the country. So,
yeah.
But I love Adelaide because it's not too big. I think Adelaide's lifestyle is amazing. In one way, it's a bit like a much smaller version of Melbourne, although Melbourne, although I was there recently, seems to have been decimated by COVID. The CBD is just not the Melbourne that it was.
Right.
But Adelaide, from the point of view of bringing up children, Adelaide from the point of view of lifestyle, cost of living, it is a really top place, and climate.
Mm. What do you, in terms of events and social activities, do you like about Adelaide? Have you been to Illuminate and those festivals and around the city?
Yes, Fringe. I think the biggest travesty was losing the Grand Prix, personally.
Really?
If ever they could bring that back, I would
there
be a
you go.
massive supporter.
That's surprising.
Massive supporter.
Yeah, right.
In fact, I was very sorry that they got rid of Clipsal, but as it used to be called. But
Sure.
fortunately, that's back on the menu.
Yeah.
Fabulous, brilliant event.
Right. Okay. You used to go every year and
Absolutely
participate.
Yes.
Yeah, right. What else do you like about? What do you think we could be doing better in Adelaide? What do you think would make it, would improve it?
Oh, I think Adelaide lifestyle is really good, and the housing here, cost of living, as I say, compared to Sydney and Melbourne in particular, and some parts of Perth, are very, very expensive. We have surrounding the city, obviously, magnificent vineyards, wineries, all of those things. I think tourism
Penfold roads,
yeah, exactly,
15 minutes that way.
Exactly.
And the hills, which are ages away, is actually 20 minutes.
Absolutely, you've got everything here.
Yeah. You mean Sidewoods Estate very, very quickly.
Absolutely.
What do you do in your spare time? Are you still doing squash?
No. I used to. My passion at the moment is clay shooting.
Oh, really?
So on weekends I shoot clays with my father-in-law.
Okay. I might be going out to the Southern Gun Club on Saturday.
Oh, there you go.
They're doing a training session.
They are doing a training session.
Yeah.
In fact, I was looking at that.
Oh, were you?
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah. I'm actually shooting this weekend at the Hellenic shooting range.
Okay.
Which is what we call sporting clays, which is great fun.
How do you go?
Doing all right.
Yeah, doing all right.
Doing all right.
What form? I mean, I do the flyaways, and then they're easy. I can do all right if we do the same thing every single time. But
no, that's what we call down the line.
Yep, down the line. That's
I don't trap. We don't do that, or I don't do that much. I do a bit of skeet, which is 2 towers.
Oh, yep.
Which
one
is
then the other.
But the field and game is my real passion, which basically changes every week. So things, they simulate rabbits running along the ground.
Oh, okay.
It might be flying over the top of you, behind you, in front of you. So
Like an
everything
action.
changes. Oh, yeah, you call for it, and sometimes it's 2 clays as opposed to 1.
Sure. Okay. And what do you like about shooting that? Apart from knitting, which was the obvious alternative.
Sporting clays is a bit like playing golf. You move from one station to the other. It's a very nice social activity. You talk to who you're shooting with, like you would on a golf course. You're out in the outside. It's a lot of fun. I personally don't kill. I don't shoot or hunt. I only do clays. But that sport is a really good discipline, and it's a great way of getting out on the weekend.
What I love about clay pigeon shooting is even if you miss it, it smashes itself.
That's true.
So you don't have to be that good.
No,
With golf,
No.
with it, you have to go and chase it.
I know. I'm no good at golf. I've been
Basically
frustrated.
chase with yourself, right?
Exactly.
I mean, it might be something I develop as an interest later in life, but certainly not now.
At least when you shoot clays and you pull the trigger, it goes in a straight line.
Yep.
Golf ball can go anywhere.
Yeah, that's right. That's not your fault.
No.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. Is there anything else you'd like to add? Is there something that you think that people in Adelaide you have a particular insight or something like that?
No, not really. As I say, I'd love to see the Grand Prix come back again. I thought it might actually happen at one stage. It
Great.
Looked like there was some chatting about it.
Yep.
I loved it. Every year it was magnificent. It was
So
much
having that
fun.
vibe like that, those events
It took over the whole city. I mean, the difference between...
And you like that?
I loved it. The difference between the Melbourne Grand Prix and the Adelaide Grand Prix is that it became... the whole city was consumed with it. It was exciting. People from all around the world would arrive here. It was magnificent. In Melbourne, whilst it's a fabulous event, it's just another sporting event in Melbourne. Yeah. And it doesn't take up the whole town, which is... We had a wonderful carnival atmosphere when it existed here.
Because when I grew up in Canberra, they'd have the Grand Prix or whatever it was when I was younger, and we'd drive to... my mum was a security guard at Parliament House, and so we'd drive through the track.
Right.
And so as a young kid, I'm thinking, I'm driving through the bloody Formula One track. And my dad, I'm imagining there that everyone's going, and then it was kind of great for me as a child. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah.
So, but obviously I think, there's some people who hate it, but I used to love it for, the wind-up was about 3 months, and I can see what people complain about it in sleepy old Adelaide.
Yeah, but it's not that difficult. I mean, the great thing about Adelaide is that you can get in and out of the city, even at peak hour, fairly easily. Yeah. I mean, honestly, compared to Sydney or Melbourne, where people spend hours in the car, Adelaide's just not like that.
Yeah, sure.
Which is a wonderful part of it.
Yeah, yeah. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for your time. It's been an absolute honor. It's not often that I get to speak with someone of your caliber and your background. And I think that's I really appreciate you coming on the show.
Not at all.
So yeah, thank you
All
for
the
coming.
best. Good luck with your legal career.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Okay.